For the next few seconds, I'd like you to think about your last implementation project. Maybe you were researching or evaluating implementation in a setting. Perhaps you were supporting a manager or practitioner to get something implemented. Maybe you're working with teachers, doctors, or nurses. Now, as you worked with these stakeholders, how far did you measure trust or psychological safety amongst them? If you were helping them implement, how many specific actions did you take to build trust among them? Was it more than 5, less than 3, or maybe none at all? Well, if you like most implementation researchers or implementers, you probably weren't paying a lot of attention to measuring trust as a mechanism or outcome, and you probably didn't engage in much trust-building activities. This can be quite surprising to some people. Detailed compliance study protocol? Check. Ethics? Check. Research team ready? Check. Engage with site? Yes, more or less. Built trust with them? Perhaps not as much. It's the same when implementing. We may turn up to meetings on time, project manage accordingly, but again, did we build trust with people? Stick around to discover why trust can often be a missing link in implementation and how a few trust-building exercises could completely transform your approach and your outcomes. So imagine two nearly identical healthcare organizations implementing the same evidence-based practice. Both have similar resources, comparable staff, and equivalent training programs. Yet 6 months into the project, one organization is thriving with high adoption rates and positive feedback from staff, and the other is struggling, facing resistance and poor outcomes. While factors like resource constraints or leadership issues may contribute, there's a critical element often overlooked in implementation science. And that's right, you guessed it, it's trust. Now, while traditional approaches to implementation are focused heavily on evidence-based strategies and top-down training, emerging research suggests that the relational aspects of implementation, particularly trust, play a pivotal role in determining success. Professor Allison Metz is an implementation science researcher and done a lot of work around trust. And her work emphasizes that while established implementation frameworks tend to prioritize technical elements, the importance of relationships and trust in achieving successful outcomes just can't be overstated. So this shift in perspective challenges us to consider how we approach implementation projects, what factors we prioritize, and what things we spend time researching. The influence of trust on stakeholder engagement and commitment is actually quite profound. When team members and stakeholders feel a sense of trust, they're more likely to fully engage with the implementation process. They're more likely to voice concerns and work collaboratively towards shared goals. This increase in engagement can lead to more effective problem solving and a greater sense of ownership over the implementation process. So how can we understand this more? Well, relational cohesion theory provides valuable insights into why trust is so crucial. This theory suggests that trust acts as a unifying force in social situations. It can foster higher levels of commitment and collectively orientated behavior among implementation teams. In practical terms, this means that teams with strong trust bonds are more likely to persist in the face of challenges and work together to overcome obstacles. Relational cultural theory also provides us with some linkage to why trust might lead to better outcomes. It speaks to how our ability to understand the perspective of others, so empathize, increases our sense of mutual interdependence and leads to positive, effective responses, which in turn builds more trust. So by fostering collaboration, mutual empowerment, and psychological safety, trust builds and creates a foundation for open communication, inclusive decision-making, aligning stakeholders towards shared goals while ensuring ethical and culturally sensitive practices. Prioritizing relational dynamics ensures implementation processes are adaptive, inclusive, and effective. Now, don't just take my word for it. A comprehensive meta-analysis by Ballier and Van Lansch examined 212 studies to explore the relationship between trust and cooperation in social dilemmas. So this was situations where individuals' interests may conflict with collective well-being. The study found a positive correlation between trust and cooperative behavior, with higher levels of trust associated with increased cooperation. Notably, this relationship was more pronounced in scenarios involving greater conflicts of interest. Another meta-analysis by De Jong, Dirks, and Giuseppe also examined 112 independent studies, and they also found this relationship between team performance and trust. So findings like this really do underscore the critical role of trust in fostering cooperative behavior, particularly in contexts where personal and collective interests are at odds. And a health system is a good example of this. You have thousands of stakeholders with different needs, goals, problems, desires. So as we delve deeper into the role of trust in implementation science, it becomes clear that this often overlooked factor acts as a hidden force, shaping project success. By recognizing and actively cultivating trust within implementation teams and among stakeholders, perhaps we can potentially transform the outcomes of our efforts. In the next section, we're going to explore specific strategies for building and maintaining trust in implementation settings, providing practical tools to enhance our approach and improve our outcomes. So like me, you may have experienced working with teams in different places trying to implement the same innovation. Team A exudes confidence, openly sharing ideas and concerns without fear. Team B, however, operates in a climate of caution, with members hesitant to speak up or take risks. This stark contrast often leads to very different outcomes. One is able to ride the roller coaster of contextual challenges better than the other, the more open team actually managing to sustain the innovation over time. I've seen multiple teams under the same system working to create and implement something only to see a lack of trust destroy the effort, often from the inside out. To truly understand trust in implementation, teams will need to dissect its components. Trust isn't a monolithic concept. It's a complex interplay of cognitive and affective elements. Cognitive trust relates to our belief in a team member's reliability and competence, while affective trust involves emotional connections and genuine care for others' well-being. Both types play crucial roles in fostering effective implementation environments. However, measuring trust and cultivating it does present significant challenges. The lack of consistent terminology and definitions for relational aspects of implementation complicates our ability to quantify trust. Existing tools like the Interpersonal Communication Assessment Scale and the Trusting Relationship Questionnaire offer some insights, but they may not capture the full spectrum of trust dynamics in implementation contexts. Now, psychological safety is a concept closely related to trust. This adds another layer of complexity. It's not trust in itself, as that tends to be between individuals, and you get things like perceived trust, but psychological safety is more of a group dynamic. It's a social condition where team members feel included and safe to contribute without fear or marginalization. So for instance, if a trainee nurse spots an error during a consultant's ward round, will she say something or not? Now this can get potentially quite serious and dangerous in healthcare because it can mean life or death. So if that nurse spots an error and doesn't say anything, that could be dangerous. So it's really important we do make sure there's psychological safety in whichever group or team or organization we're looking at. But more generally, psychological safety is essential for effective implementation as well as trust. And yet again, measuring this intangible quality remains a challenge for researchers and practitioners alike. I'll make a video on psychological safety in the future, but if you want to know more, check out Professor Amy Edmonton's book, The Fearless Organization, and also her psychological safety scale. So back to trust. Despite these obstacles, understanding how to cultivate it's going to be crucial for implementation success. The research suggests that addressing power differentials through humility and co-creation can significantly enhance trust-building efforts. Implementation support practitioners, which again we'll cover in another video, play a vital role in this process, bridging the gap between research and practice by emphasizing relational strategies. So how can scientists effectively measure and operationalize trust? Well, we don't have all the answers yet. Integrating user-centered design approaches and focusing on both cognitive and affective trust components offers promising values. By developing more nuanced measurement tools and prioritizing trust-building activities, perhaps we can create implementation environments that foster innovation, collaboration, and ultimately better outcomes. So as we move forward, it's clear that trust isn't just a nice-to-have in implementation. It's a fundamental building block of success. In our next section, we'll explore practical strategies for building and maintaining trust, providing you with the actionable tools to enhance your approach and improve your outcomes. So how do you cultivate something as intangible as trust? We're about to dive into a theoretical model put together by Professor Allison Metz and her team. And this theorizes how relationships and trust can support implementation outcomes. And when it comes to fostering trust in implementation settings, Metz's model categorizes strategies into two main types: relational and technical. Relational strategies focus on interpersonal connections and emotional bonds, while technical strategies emphasize competence and reliability. Both are theorized here as being essential for creating trusting relationships. So if you look at some of the specific relational strategies, there are 5 key approaches: showing vulnerability, approaching interactions with authenticity, engaging in co-learning, participating in empathy-driven exchanges, and using bi-directional communications. So these strategies really do move beyond superficial team-building exercises to create genuine connections amongst stakeholders. Now, on the technical side, you might be more familiar with these, but effective trust-building strategies include supporting frequent interactions, demonstrating responsiveness to requests, showcasing expertise, and planning for quick wins. These approaches help establish credibility and reliability, which again are crucial components of cognitive trust. So the model then theorizes that these relational strategies and these technical strategies, when they're employed effectively, will lead to these things here. So we get positive, effective responses, perceived value added, predictability, and a safe and secure learning environment. And that, in turn, leads to the all-important trusting relationships. How do these then lead to improved implementation of evidence and outcomes? Well, trusting relationships will, according to this theory, will of course lead to an increase in people's perceived capability, opportunity, and motivation to carry out the implementation, which also leads to more commitment and resilience in the face of challenges, and all that will then lead to improved implementation outcomes. Now, a practical example of these strategies in action comes from another paper published by Allison. It's called "Is Implementation Research Out of Step with Implementation Practice?" And in this study, experienced implementation support practitioners, so people that really do try and support implementation in practice, reported a significant shift in their approach to implementation over time. So many of them started out using didactic training methods. They would train teams in the CFIR or the TDF framework or, various implementation theories and models. But they moved away from that towards more participatory models that emphasize trust building and co-creation. They found when they did this, they got far better results. So one specific technique mentioned is the one-to-one exercise. This is where team members engage in active listening to identify shared values. It involves fostering connections and trust amongst all the stakeholders. So I've witnessed Allison carrying this out. You basically start out with asking someone, why did you get into the field that you're in, or why did you end up doing what you do? And then as they're replying, you're really listening for what values they have. And there are lists of values online, and there's many, but it's things like hardworking, authenticity, being truthful, helping others. And when you echo this back to people, it can lead to quite a strong emotive reaction, and people feel safer, and then suddenly you get this very trusting kind of trust starts to happen. It's really quite remarkable. I highly recommend it, and I can leave a example of this in the links below. Now, it's important to realize it's not always easy to show vulnerability or be authentic in teams, particularly if they don't feel very psychologically safe. But even just 5 minutes at the start of each meeting can really help build a significant amount of trust over time. It might take months or even a year or two, but it really can shift how much trust there is in a team. So I think as implementation researchers, we really need to research this stuff more. We need to test out theoretical models such as Allison's. We need to learn from implementation support practitioners that do this stuff regularly, and we need to get their learnings back into the implementation science literature. So as we've explored the importance of trust in implementation science, a provocative question emerges. Could there be a point where too much trust becomes detrimental to implementation outcomes? This idea challenges us to consider trust not just as a universally positive force, but as a complex moderator of implementation strategies. Well, it undoubtedly plays a crucial role in shaping implementation outcomes. It's essential to recognize that it doesn't operate in isolation. Other factors like resource availability, organizational culture, and leadership also support significantly the influence of implementation efforts. Some experts argue that an overemphasis on trust building could potentially divert attention and resources from these equally important elements. However, the evidence supporting trust's positive impact on implementation outcomes is really compelling. In Allison's study examining the role of implementation support practitioners, participants consistently emphasized that high-quality relationships among stakeholders were critical for achieving successful implementation results. Trust also facilitates smoother knowledge transfer and skill development. And there are longitudinal studies that have highlighted the vital role of trust in sustaining implemented changes over time. This underscores the importance of viewing trust building not just as a one-time event, but as an ongoing process throughout the implementation journey. So as we conclude, let's consider how might our approach to implementation change if we prioritize trust building as much as we do our evidence-based interventions? Because it's clear trust may well form the bedrock of effective and equitable implementation. The relational aspects of our work, often overlooked, are critical to bridging the gap between research and practice. And Allison Metz's powerful insight resonates. Relationships are the foundation of this work. You need to build trust. And here's how you build trust. You demonstrate empathy, vulnerability, and humility. So let's prioritize trust building. Let's start focusing more of our research into this area. Let's test and develop tools that facilitate trust. Let's engage in continuous reflection on relational dynamics in teams. And I'll just leave you with a final thought. How might our field evolve if we treated trust as a primary outcome rather than just a facilitator of implementation success? Thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Christian Hudson. This is the Essential Implementation Podcast.